working. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here, the last talk of the day and the conference. So yeah, I'd like to talk today about this, how to solve MEV via this app-specific sequencing. So I work as a researcher and developer at Arrakis. We are doing on-chain market making and liquidity management for crypto projects. And, but let's start with a simple story. So when we talk about maximal extracted value, this is like the idea we all have. So we have our very naive friend who's trying to interact with blockchains, and he was even approached by a bald guy in the street trying to give him money to actually use blockchains. So he received maybe 4,000 USDC, and he wants to trade. So he goes to the first website he sees, he starts interacting with these UIs, and he says, okay, I will try to swap my 4,000 USDC by ETH. So he doesn't even say how much ETH, he just says, I want whatever it takes to get the ETH. And this is like the reality of most meme traders. They just want to trade and they don't care about the output. So he does that via his MetaMask wallet, which is connected to a public RPC. So his transaction ends up on this public mempool. So little he knows that on the other side, there is this bad actor, maybe bad actor is like heartless bot, which we call a solver or a searcher, who is trying to extract value from these transactions. So what he does is just, okay, he said, I will make a bundle. This transaction will include you, but before that, I will insert a transaction which is moving the price of this asset a lot to one direction. So the end transaction of the user, he is receiving 0.1 ETH only. So to finalize his thread here, he just inputs another transaction in the other direction to put the price back to the real price, and he cashes the difference up. So at the end, what we observe is what we call a sandwich attack, which is composed by this front-running transaction and a back-running transaction to put the price back at the pool, and the solver, we know it cashes out the difference. So our little friend here is very sad now. He lost all his money, almost all his money. So, but he didn't give up. So he started now studying a little bit. So he knows, I have to set this slippage amount. I cannot say just trade my token. I have to take the minimum amount I want to be able to trade. But he's struggling, like markets are very volatile. And what he realizes is like, okay, I'll just put at least one ETH because it's not going through. So the solver is still there listening to the transactions. He says, I have multiple pools I can trade against. So I just include the transaction, but I just give you the minimum you asked me. So he includes the transaction, and then everything goes on. The solver still earns money. So it's kind of a bittersweet situation because he obtained what he wanted, but he was kind of forced to do it. So our friend now watched Samuel's talk, and he knows that there is a way to actually go through this mempool, and he uses a MEV blocker RPC. So he sends his transaction to a private mempool, and he knows that he is protected against any kind of sandwiching in this scenario. So he can even set this same transaction, and he probably will get more than one ETH in this case. So the problem with this is that we are introducing extra trust assumptions on the model. So we know that this private mempool and RPC have to be trusted. So centralization is a problem, and trust assumptions are also very important. And in this case of MEV blocker, MEV is not fully eliminated. So we know that if there is any possible way of backrunning the transactions that are going through this mempool, they will do it, and they will give you back 90% of the revenue, and they will keep 10% for themselves. So it's kind of, we kind of solve it, but it's not fully yet there. So one solution that is kind of new, 2 years old maybe, comes from traditional finance, and it's called batch auctions. So in this case, we have kind of a different mempool. In this case, we have a mempool of intents, which are basically signed transactions that are floating around, and that the person who is permitted to use them can use them. So for example, in this case, we have some swaps that are signed, and they determine the amounts you want in and out. So these intents are just not normal transactions. They are just signatures that are floating around. So solvers are still there. They are still greedy, still heartless. But the thing is that now with custom sequencing rules, what we can do is to use their computing power, their advantage and their knowledge to actually help us settle these transactions. So what they do in general is to compete against each other, putting solutions to this intense mempool. So they batch transactions together. How do they do that? So they take a subset of the transactions in this mempool, and they can even insert their own swap. This swap can be on any DEX. They can even use their own liquidity. And by doing that, so they compete against each other doing that. And there is some, in this case, an off-chain auction saying, okay, this solver got the best solution for this because it's providing the most benefit for the users. So the auction runs, there is a winner. This solver now has the right to actually settle all these intents on-chain. So the transaction at the end is a transaction with all transfers and swaps. But what is very important is that this happens with a uniform clearing price. So what that means is that all the users at this transaction are getting like the same price vector, meaning that there's no sandwich attacks anymore. You cannot front run and back run because everyone has the same price. So this is how COW protocol is implemented, and you can interact with it by using CowSwap. So you should use it. It's super nice. But I'm not here advocating for COW protocol in general. So let's see if we solve MEV yet. So if you were at Lioba's talk yesterday, and even Samuel talked about it, so what we know is that the MEV landscape is quite varied. So we don't have all these sandwich attacks. We have a lot of different kind of attacks like SexDex, atomic arbitrage, just-in-time liquidity attacks. So what we know from this is that the origin of MEV is not only a consequence of reordering of transactions, but it's also a consequence of how latent your blockchain is. So we know Ethereum blocks are 12 seconds, and in traditional finance, that's a lot. So let's study one of these examples, which is its SexDex arbitrage scenario. So SexDex arbitrage works in this way. So in the graphics, you have this blue line, which is representing the sex price, so a centralized exchange like Binance, Coinbase. And this is moving very, very fast, very often. So, and in red, you have your AMM price, which is tail, so it changes every block, every 12 seconds. And what happens in general is that when there is a huge price difference between the AMM price and this sex price, like in time T1, for example, what you see is that an arbitrager will come, will say, okay, I'll buy from this AMM, I'll move the price all the way up until I have profits by selling this amount on a sex. So this is basically what SexDex arbitrage means. And this is well studied, so we know that there is a metric to actually measure this difference, which is called loss versus rebalancing, or LVR, which you can assume as the opportunity cost for liquidity providers that pay by quoting at stale prices. So we know that arbitrators or solvers are competing against each other to extract this LVR value, this difference in price. And this they do by tipping block builders, and block builders are then putting some of this money to actually the proposers. So as you see, this problem is quite different from sandwiching, because sandwiching comes from, so the MEV comes from the actual trader, and here the value comes from liquidity providers that are actually putting money in there. So how can we solve this problem? I mean, batch auctions is not a solution for this. So you can say, for example, just don't trade. I mean, that's a basic solution. Or you can just say, don't trade if price difference is too high. So you can do that by inputting an off-chain element in your architecture. But you can also say, auction off the right to arbitrage the pool, so directly in the app. So it's like basically saying, okay, you can extract the MEV, but you have to pay for it first. So if in a competitive setting, this is working because searchers are competing against each other. If they know they can extract a little bit more, they will pay a little bit more until they basically pay all the MEV back to the protocol. So the question is, how can we build this? Because it seems like complicated. It seems like we have to build a whole new thing from scratch. So what we know is that and we have experimented with that already, is that there are modular frameworks appearing. So Valantis is a modular DEX, and Uniswap before is live today, so it was announced a few hours ago. And what you can do in these modular frameworks is to modify the actual logic that is happening in some of the actions of the pool. So this is composed by modules or hooks, which are basically working in the following way. So you have a normal swap happening. This you know you have swapped in your life. What you can do is to keep the core swapping, for example, logic that Uniswap before provides you, and you can input some logic before and some logic after. For example, in the logic before, you can say, I will only trade against these solvers I know, or I will charge you a fee depending who you are, or even you can say, I don't know, I just trade in this direction, whatever logic you can implement in this case. And after swap can be, for example, I collected this amount of money in this swap, and then I will distribute it back to my users. So what is nice about this is that you can reuse a lot of the code. So maybe 90% of the code is already there, and you just need to implement some extra logic in these cases. So you can do faster iterations, experiment, and of course with less risk because you have less code to audit. And of course you have network effects. So deploying with these guys, with Uniswap Valantis has its own advantages because they already partner with a lot of projects. So you have these kind of advantages. So let's talk about some of these rules that we can construct on these modular DEXs to actually solve MEV. So we saw batch auctions, but let's see what we can do on the LP side now. So last year we deployed this protocol hot AMM together with Valantis, and you can see it's like very modular. So you have several elements that are core to the system, and we introduced this new module. So what happens in this case is that this AMM is a hybrid AMM, so you have one permissionless side where anyone can trade, and we have an RFQ system where all these solvers can trade against the liquid. So the liquid is the same, but it has two inputs from users. So what solvers do is to bring up-to-date SEX prices. So they quote our system. So in the top right, you have our quoting service. So solvers ask, is this price okay? And we say, yeah. And then we give them a signed quote, so they can actually take this ticket and use the liquidity in the pool to trade. So what you can do with this is actually eliminate all this SEX-DEX arbitrage, because if they tell you this is a SEX price and I will trade at this price, then they are trading at the actual price that other arbitrators would exploit as a difference. So we also implemented some dynamic fees to protect the permissionless side AMM, because there is some advantages of putting higher fees when you don't have any kind of quoting activity. So that's a protection. And the advantage is that we can just reuse all the capital efficiency of concentrated liquidity that this DEX provides. So yeah, we just need to implement this extra logic, and we don't need to think about how swaps are actually working. So that's one example. Another example is that we're building with Uniswap before is quite similar to the previous one. So we will just focus on private order flow. So in this case, solvers compete for the right to be the first ones to actually transact against our liquidity. So they open the pool. And of course, in equilibrium, when they compete against each other, they tend to pay back the MEV they would extract back to the pool, back to the LPs. So of course, again, we recovered the capital efficiency of concentrated liquidity provided by Uniswap before. So we can give very, very concentrated quotes, very efficient quotes to solvers just by changing these ranges according to maybe volatility. So there are some other hooks in the way. So very interesting ones about Angstrom by Sorara Labs, which is basically mixing this kind of builder hook with cow swap. So doing an auction to put this first transaction and then batching the transactions out. So there are other implementations like this auction managed AMM by Bunny, which is a project done by the Uniswap Foundation and implemented by this other project. and Project Geistar, which is basically doing dynamic fees in asymmetric dynamic fees. So, I mean, there are many hooks to come. So, of course, this started today in Uniswap. So you will see them appearing more and more often. So, let's talk about what are the trade-offs, because all seems like, okay, we can solve this problem, but what are the things we are not solving actually? So these protocols are not very composable because you know that, for example, winning that the transaction is included in a batch auction in a protocol doesn't mean that this will be included in another batch auction in another protocol. So we know already intents are not very composable. So even if you could stretch them out, you are not sure that this will settle in both sides of the equation. So this is not very good, but the truth is that the majority of the order flow is just one swap token A to token B. Even cross-chain swaps don't have a problem with this kind of setting. But the reality is that, yeah, it's not really necessary, but yeah, there are some EIP proposals to actually try to solve this. One another caveat is centralization. So if you realize, now if you look back, it's like you know that these auctions cannot be easily run on-chain. It's like you are trying to run logic which is expensive, so do it in on-chain is kind of difficult. So what we know is that you might have some sort of solver network that are trying to run these transactions like Soraya Labs is doing. But you need to introduce like economic security to this network, like how can you slash these guys because it's a network. So of course there's some restaking networks that you could implement to reuse some of these liquid staking tokens to actually back your network. And there are some other solutions like trying to not necessarily decentralize, but at least reduce the trust assumptions. So put all this logic of the auction in a TE and just let it run and you trust it. And for most people this is okay right now. But you can also use like networks of TEs like Suave to actually help to decentralize these protocols. So the last concerning issue is just censorship resistance. So we know, and this is very important, that if you won an auction, you can think about this batch auction in CowSwap. If you won that, it doesn't mean that the builder will like you and will include this in the block. So you have to go through these two auctions, like the application auction and this MEV boost auction that you saw in some stock. So this is still an incognita. It's not clear how it will be solved. So there are some maybe protocols implementation that will be added to Ethereum, like inclusion list or multiple concurrent proposers. But yeah, it's still an incognita. And there are some scenarios, and this is very, very interesting, where you can actually just have the deterministic rules on your sequencer on the base chain that help actually processing the transactions in a fair way. So like first come, first serve, or priority fee ordering. So just the last minute, I would like to talk about this priority fee ordering, which is how to actually solve all these problems we talked about, like in a very elegant way with 2 lines of code. So this is like it's kind of a breakthrough, but I think the value has not been given yet. So it's a research done by Paradigm researchers, which is called Priority is All You Need. So you consider a blockchain with priority fee ordering, like the OP stack, so Unichain, Base, all these OP stack chains. So what you know is that in general, these solvers are trying to compete against each other to get the MEV. So in order to do that, they send big fee priority ordering, big fees to the actual layer 2. And they get an ordering, which is now, you can take this ordering, translate it into your application, and charge these solvers an amount corresponding to maybe 99% their priority fee. So the ordering they had in the layer 2, so if they just put this fee to the layer 2, it's the layer 2 who is getting the MEV back. But if this fee is now put in the application, so you actually like scale this amount to your application, and you get in competition 99% of the top of the block MEV. So the thing is that yeah, this logic can be implemented in 2 lines of Solidity code. So you can think about implementing a hook in this modular frameworks, and basically you solve the MEV with 2 lines of code, and yeah, I gave you a $1 million protocol idea. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Daniel, for this presentation, very insightful. I think we have time for 1 or maximum 2 questions, because then we have the closing talk. Yes?
In-protocol solutions are, oh, sorry. Yeah. In-protocol solutions like priority fees, stuff like that will be, they're going to stop, they're going to make this stuff redundant, right? So why have an auction at the app level instead of the block level?
Because you need to convince Ethereum to have this kind of priority fee. So in layer 2s, you have it. It's like, use it. But in Ethereum and other protocols, other chains even, if you don't have this kind of systems, then you need to do finding some workarounds. So yeah, but this is very elegant. So I would say.
Yeah. And for your quote server, who's paying the cost of the quotes? Because
I mean, you get some spreads always when you trade against solvers, so we are paying for it.
Any more questions? I think, yeah, we are done. Thanks a lot, Daniel.
Thank you.
And now, yes, I invite you to go to the BIM for the closing talk with Professor Claudio Tessone. Thanks so much.